Welcome to Bridge to Self, where we spotlight the stories of second and 1.5 generation Black Americans. I'm your host, Ben Arthur. So I'm solo for today's episode, and I wanted to talk a little bit about empathy and understanding and tie that into the themes of the show in regards to the larger second and 1.5 generation immigrant experience. I think empathy and understanding is more important than ever just because there seems to be such a substantial lack of it. Even as the world becomes larger in a sense, just in terms of all of us being connected globally, it feels like there is a lack of empathy and understanding when it comes to people having different perspectives from the majority, being from a different culture from the majority, questioning someone's belonging in the country because of that perspective or their experiences or where their family comes from. And look, this isn't I'm not going to go down the political rabbit hole. This isn't a political show. You guys can find your your shows for that. This isn't going to be a platform to really discuss those things, but I think generally speaking, factually speaking, I think we can all agree that there is this othering that seems to be occurring at just an exponential rate, whether you look at the news media or through social media, regardless of the perspective or the belief that you have. I think we can all agree that that's been happening, and I think this ties so deeply to the theme of this show, just because the second gen experience is all about understanding. It's so core to the foundation of that experience growing up in the US. And I just think when I think about empathy and understanding, I think so much about just my upbringing. And for those of you who've seen multiple episodes, heard me talk about my upbringing a little bit, you'll know that I come from a very non diverse environment, situation, growing up predominantly white suburb in Seattle. But even amid that, I always had a very diverse group of friends from the time I was very young up through kind of 18 and beyond. Even when I got into college, going to a private Catholic school, which also wasn't all that diverse, I always had a very diverse group of friends. It wasn't necessarily just that like I would be friends with the like one or two other black people. It was honestly that I always maybe even felt most strongly connected to the other second gen kids. So if it was like one of my best friends growing up, his parents were from Cameroon in West Africa. And so he was Cameroonian American, but it wasn't just other children of African immigrants. It was, another one of my closest friends was Korean American. Another close friend was Indian American. I always in a lot of ways, I always felt super connected to those folks, right, who had immigrant parents and kind of navigating that nuance and that blended cultural upbringing growing up. But even beyond that, I just felt like I could relate to a whole bunch of people, whether they were just African American or they were white or maybe an immigrant, first generation immigrant themselves. I always felt like I can um, talk to different groups of people, relate to different groups of people, connect to different groups of people, because in a way, I always felt like I could see myself in other people, just in terms of maybe um, the whole second gen experience is about assimilating almost, right, and being a chameleon in the situation that you're in, and depending on the group of people I was with, I felt like I could relate to them, maybe not fully, but that I always felt like I could bounce between different groups of people, even if they're from dramatically different backgrounds. And this is a bit different, but I think a lot about just the experiences my dad had. He's a pharmacist, and he would work at a kind of a bunch of different pharmacies in the greater Seattle area. There were times where he would be in um, a pharmacy in like a smaller town, like a rural or predominantly white, very few immigrant type of pharmacies that he'd be at, and kind of just him always explaining um, the subtle or not so subtle racism that he would get, either because he's black and or because of his thick accent. Being a little kid and wondering why people would kind of talk about my dad like that, or be so rude to him because he's like the nicest person ever if you get to know him. And I think, and I bring that up, and just my experiences having a diverse group of friends growing up, and just to tie that into the fact that when you are a second gen immigrant or you are a 1.5 gen immigrant, you have a natural proclivity almost to empathy and understanding because it defines the entirety of your existence in the US. You have to be understanding and empathetic of other people's backgrounds you because you are someone who's different than other people, right? Just in navigating, balancing two different worlds. And so I think because of that, and I talked about just how in the world today, it seems like there is such a lack of those things, right? Empathy and understanding, that I think second gen immigrants, generation and a half immigrants, like we have a superpower in that regard, right? And we can be looked at as leaders in a time where it feels like the world is getting crazier and crazier, us kind of living in, I don't know, it feels like a matrix some days. I just think because of the experience of us who have parents from another country, but we spent either all of or most of our life in the US, we can be almost the beacon for other people to be more accepting and understanding of other people. And there are tons of people of all kinds of backgrounds, maybe who are strictly like American, who maybe even come from a super like non-diverse background, who are that way, right? I'm not saying that there aren't non-immigrant children who don't have that ability as well, but just because of the experience of immigrant children growing up in the US, um, there's a naturalness to that. And I think in the world we live in today, we need to look to those kinds of people more, and hearing out their stories, and hopefully people can gain understanding or inspiration to be better in their own ways because of understanding the experience of second and 1.5 gen kids. I just wanted to get that message out there because it feels like it's needed more than ever in a chaotic world, especially what 2025 has been. It feels like just to start this year, still in March to this point, but it already feels especially crazy. And I think that's that message of acceptance and empathy and understanding. We need reminders of that more than ever. And I think looking at the theme of this show and the types of stories I've spotlighted and hope to continue to spotlight, through that, we can all be better, right? Be better people. That'll do it for this week's episode. Short episode this week, but just had some of those thoughts I wanted to get out there. But yeah, you guys know the deal. Every other Wednesday at 5 p.m. Central Time is when new episodes come out. It's at Bridge to Self on YouTube. You can also find the show on Instagram. I post a lot of the clips from the episodes on that platform. But I'm active on the YouTube community page. Be sure to check out the audio version of the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. But until next time, I will see you guys soon. All right, peace out.